Hi pre-calc students. I'm noticing that a lot of you have questions on starting with the graph and then writing the equation from there. So here is one example. Okay, so we're given this graph and we want to write down the equation. Now, in the instructions, I think it should tell you whether it's a sine function or a cosine function. Okay, so if it's a cosine, we're thinking that y is a times cosine of bx minus c plus d. Okay, if it's a sine, we're thinking the same setup, but with sine instead of cosine, although the numbers b and c may not be the same here in a. Okay, so I first think about the y values, because to me that's easier, but really that's just a preference. Okay, so I see that all the bumps, the tops of the bumps are up here at y value 3, and the bottoms of the bumps are down here at y value negative 5. Okay, and then to find the middle, we can add those together and divide by 2. So 3 minus 5 divided by 2 is negative 2 divided by 2, which is negative 1. Okay, and so here's negative 1, and it does look as though this line is the middle. Okay, so the midline is this line, y equals negative 1, and that tells us d for either one of these. Okay, so we know that d is equal to negative 1. Okay, and then the amplitude, a, is the distance between the midline and the top of the bump, or the midline and the bottom of the bump. Okay, and either way, from negative 1 up to 3 is 4 units, or from negative 1 down to negative 5 is 4 units. So that tells us that a is 4, unless we want to do a flip, and then a would be negative 4. Okay, so now, so that takes care of the y values. Okay, I'm just going to erase some of this to clear it up. Okay, now let's talk about the x values. Okay, this is the point where you need to pay attention to whether you're trying to get a sine or a cosine. Okay, so let's say we're going to do cosine. Okay, then we want to focus on one period, and the reason it's important to think about which trig function is so that you know where to think of a period starting and where to think of it stopping. So cosine, we think of one period as starting at the top and ending at the top. So we are thinking about this portion of the graph. Okay, and then how wide is that portion? Well, it goes from here to here. Okay, and this x value is negative 1, and this x value is 5. Okay, so the period is 5 minus negative 1, which is 6. So this lets us solve for b. So the formula for period is 2 pi divided by b. So 2 pi divided by b equals 6. That tells us that 2 pi equals 6 times b. And then dividing by 6 tells us that b equals pi over 3. Okay, now we need to find the phase shift. Okay, and so if we're going to think about our period as starting at this point, then our phase shift then, okay, so compared to the y-axis where a period would normally start, it's been moved 1 to the left. Okay, so our phase shift is sort of this situation. So our phase shift is -1, okay? And then we can use the formula for phase shift, c divided by b equals -1. Or in other words, c equals -b, and then b is pi over 3, so c equals -pi/3. So now we can just take these four numbers and plug it in to this cosine equation. So we get y equals, we know a is 4 because we didn't think about flipping. So a is 4, and then cosine of b is pi/3. Then x minus c is -pi/3. So minus a negative means plus pi/3. And then plus d means to subtract 1. So here is our equation. Okay, now what I want to do is suppose that instead of doing a cosine function, we instead want to find a sine function. Okay, then some things change. Okay, so the period, okay, so for a sine function, we think of our graph starting in the middle, on the midline, and then going up, back down to the middle, down, and then back up to the middle. So I would think of a period as starting here and ending here. Okay, so our period, if we're thinking of a sine function, we might think, let's see, this is 3.5 minus, this is -2.5, okay, which is still 6. Okay, because if we have a sine function or a cosine function, that doesn't change what the period is. Okay, even though we might think of it starting and ending in different places, right? The distance from there to there and the distance we thought about for cosine between the tops of the bumps is still the same. Okay, so that still gives us b is pi/3. Now the phase shift is going to be different. Okay, if we are thinking about this as being our starting point, then our phase shift is this distance. Okay, because we're going left, it's negative, and it's 2.5. I think I probably am going to prefer a fraction, so it's -5/2. Phase shift is c divided by b. And multiplying by b, c is -5/2 times b, and of course b is still pi/3, so c is -5/2 times pi/3, which is -5 pi divided by 6. So now we can put this together to find a sine equation. Okay, so I'm looking here, y equals a sine bx minus c plus d. So y equals a is still 4, then sine of b is still pi/3 x. Now c is -5 pi/6, so minus a negative gives us plus 5 pi/6. And then d is still -1. So we get this equation. Okay, one more situation to mention. What if we, instead of thinking about a period starting here at -2.5, we imagine it starting here at +1/2. Then a full period, let's see, I'm going to erase this. A full period or a full cycle would go down into the middle and then up and back to the middle here. Okay, and so this would be a period. Okay, now that still has length pi over 3, but now the phase shift is different. So now our phase shift, we're thinking about going from here, right 1/2. So phase shift is positive 1/2. And phase shift is c over b. So c is 1/2 times b, or 1/2 times pi over 3, which is pi over 6. Okay, now here's the other thing. This is what I really wanted to point out. If I think about my period starting here, then we start by going down. Okay, so that means we're not going to have a sine function. We're going to have a negative sine function. This is just supposed to be like a blank. Okay, so sine of something. This negative sign is what tells us that we start on the midline and go down, rather than earlier when we started on the midline and started by going up. Okay, so when we do this, we get y equals, now a is not 4, a is negative 4. So negative 4 sine of pi over 3x. C is pi over 6, so minus pi over 6 minus 1. Okay, so here are 3 different ways that we could find an equation for this graph. There are certainly many, many, many more. In fact, infinitely many, because you can always add or subtract 2 pi to the, well, not 2 pi, add or subtract the period to the phase shift without changing the graph.